Elias was a man who preferred the company of animals. Men lied, men laughed. Men called him names they thought he could not hear, or names they spat right at his boots when the whiskey made them bold. Saddle-broke fool. That was the one that stuck, branding him clearer than the iron he pressed into the hide of another man's steer. He worked odd jobs at the bar T, a rundown spread of land that was more dust than pasture. He mended fences that the wind knocked down just for spite. He broke horses that fought the bit, and he kept his head low and his mouth shut. He was quiet, but not simple. He just had nothing left to say to a world that had made up its mind about him. The story was 10 years old, but held its shape: a lost saddle, a bottle of rye, and a girl with yellow hair who, the men said, never existed at all. Elias had woken up in the mud behind the saloon. His head split open, his pay gone, and his saddle, a good, hand-tooled roper, vanished. The girl he thought he'd been courting, the one he'd spent his money on, was gone. The saloon owner said he'd been drinking alone, talking to an empty chair. He'd been a joke ever since. The saddle-broke fool. A cowboy so drunk and dumb he'd lost his own leather to a ghost. So Elias found his solace where the land was empty and the judgment was honest. The West he knew was not a place of heroes. It was vast, lonely, and mean. The sun was a hammer blow by noon. The trails were rivers of pale dust that coated the inside of a man's throat. And the wind, it never stopped screaming. It scraped through the canyons like a grieving woman, pulling at his hat, stinging his eyes, and promising nothing but more wind tomorrow. He loved it, the silence of it. Out here, tending a line of barbed wire miles from the bunkhouse, there was only the creak of his saddle leather and the soft, steady breathing of his horse. Dusty. Horses made sense. You were good to them. They were good to you. They did not mock what they did not understand. They just knew the weight of his hand and the calm in his voice, and they trusted him in a way no person ever had. He was making camp miles from the ranch, under a low shelf of red rock. He'd been tracking a stray steer, and the light had failed him. The fire was small, just enough to heat a can of beans and keep the worst of the night's chill at bay. The mesquite popped, sending up sparks that died against a sky suffocating with stars. He was pouring the grounds from his coffee when the sound came. It was not a coyote, not a rattler. It was the snap of a dry twig, too heavy to be a rabbit. Elias did not move, save for the hand that dropped slow and easy to the Colt holstered at his hip. His body went still. He was a man who expected trouble, even when he did not invite it. "Don't shoot," a voice cracked. It was a woman. She stumbled out of the shadow of the junipers, her hands raised, palms out. Elias nearly drew anyway, not out of aggression, but sheer confusion. She was the wrongest thing he had ever seen in the desert. She was a bride, or she had been. The dress was white, or had been, made of silk that had no business on this hard land. Now, the hem was ripped to shreds, caked in dirt and stained with something dark. A fine lace veil was snagged in her hair, torn and hanging sideways like a broken wing. She was young, early 20s perhaps, and pale as milk under the moonlight. She was breathing like a winded deer, her eyes wide and dark, darting from him to the shadows she just left, as if expecting the devil himself to follow. He rose slowly, his hand still on his gun. "Ma'am." She flinched at his voice. He could see her clearer now by the firelight. Her lip was split, a dark, swollen bruise forming at the corner of her mouth. It was not from a fall. It was from a fist. "Please," she whispered. The word was dust. I have no money. I have nothing." "What are you doing out here?" His voice was rough from disuse. "You're miles from any town." She shook her head, a sharp, frantic movement. "I cannot go to town. I have to keep going. West." "West is a big direction," Elias said, his suspicion thick. A woman alone, dressed like that, with that bruise on her face. She was trouble, the kind of trouble that came with bullets and loud men. Please, just water, and to sit by the fire. I am so cold." He watched her for a long moment. He did not like it. He wanted to tell her to move on, to point her toward the ranch and wash his hands of it. But the tremor in her hands was not just from the cold. It was terror, the deep-down kind. He grunted and nodded toward the fire. "You can sit. I ain't got much, but you can have what's left of the coffee." She did not move toward him, but rather sideways, sinking to the ground on the opposite side of the small fire. She wrapped her arms around her knees, pulling the ruined dress tight. She kept her face turned half away, hiding the bruise in the shadow. Elias sat back down on his bedroll, his saddle at his back. He kept his rifle across his lap. They said nothing. The only sounds were the fire and the ever-present wind. He watched her. She was hiding shame. He was guarding his distrust. He'd seen women flee before, but they were usually fleeing a brothel or a bad debt. This one was fleeing something worse. She stared into the flames, but Elias knew she was not seeing them. Her mind was somewhere else, somewhere dark. Delilah saw the parlor, her father's parlor, Reverend Martin, a man whose voice could call down brimstone from the pulpit and whose hands were cold as iron. He had not asked her. He had informed her. "Mr. Abernathy is a good man, a powerful man. He has agreed to take you. Take her, like a stray calf." She remembered the scent of Mr. Abernathy's cigar and the wetness of his eyes as he looked at her. He was 50, perhaps more, with a soft belly and hands that were always damp. Her father had smiled, had shaken that damp hand, and the bargain was struck. She was payment for her father's gambling debts, traded for the security of the church. The wedding night had been a blur of white lace and quiet terror. The room in Abernathy's large, silent house, the heavy velvet curtains drawn tight, suffocating the air, the smell of brandy on his breath as he'd unbuttoned his waistcoat, smiling that soft, damp smile. "Your father assured me you were obedient. Delilah, show me." When she had frozen, when she had pulled away from that first touch, his hand had moved faster than she could have imagined. The sting was sharp, shocking. The copper taste of blood filled her mouth. It was not anger in his eyes. It was ownership. "You are my wife now," he'd said, as if that explained everything. "You will do as you are told." He had turned to lock the door. In that moment, while his back was turned, she had not thought. She had simply moved. The heavy brass candlestick on the mantel, the sound it made against his skull was dull, heavy. He had crumpled without a word. She had not waited to see if he was breathing. She had grabbed the veil, scrambled out the low bedroom window, and run. She ran until her lungs burned and the silk of her dress was in tatters, following the moon west, away from the town, away from the man who owned her. The fire popped, and she jumped, her breath catching in her throat. Elias watched her, unmoved. "Coyotes," he said flatly. "They won't come near the fire." She nodded, though she knew it was not a coyote that made her jump. The silence stretched again, heavier this time. Elias finally broke it. "Weary. Morning's coming. I can give you jerky and water. The stage line to Purgatory Springs is about 10 miles north of here. You can buy a ticket west." Her head snapped up, panic erasing the exhaustion from her face. No, I cannot." "It's the only way, ma'am, lest you plan on walking to California." "You do not understand," she said, her voice trembling but gaining a sudden, hard edge. "He will have men at the stage line. He will have men in every town. If they find me—" She looked at him, her eyes burning with a terrible certainty. "They will drag me back in ropes." Elias went still. Ropes. Not just a runaway wife, a piece of property. He knew that law. A man's wife was his chattel. If she ran, he could bring her back, and the law would help him. The bruise on her lip suddenly made a different kind of sense. He sighed, a long, slow breath of irritation. This was exactly the kind of trouble he avoided. This was not his fight. He was the saddle-broke fool, not a savior. Getting involved meant attracting attention, and attention always led to ridicule. Or worse, to gunfire. He looked at his horse, who was dozing nearby, then back at the woman. She was watching him, not begging, but waiting for the judgment. "I am riding south come morning," he said, his voice flat. "Got a job breaking horses for the rail company. It is quiet country, no towns, no stages. You can ride along. I'll take you 3, maybe 4 days. After that, you are on your own." She stared at him. "Why?" "'Cause I reckon you'll die out here if I do not. And I do not want your ghost haunting my camp." He tossed her his spare bedroll. "Get some sleep." He turned away from her, settling his back against his saddle. He did not sleep. He listened to her breathing, and to the wind. Just before dawn, he kicked dirt onto the fire. He already had Dusty saddled when she woke, stiff and shivering. He handed her a piece of dry jerky and the canteen. "Drink." She did, greedily. He motioned to his spare mare, a mild-tempered bay. "You can ride her. Can you ride?" "I can ride," she said. She was clumsy, hindered by the ruined dress, but she got her foot in the stirrup and swung herself up. Elias nodded once. "Do not talk. Just ride, and keep up." He did not offer her a name, and she did not offer hers. He pointed his horse south, into the rising, blood-red sun, and did not look back to see if she was following. He could hear the clip-clop of the mare behind him. It was enough. They rode across hard country. The land was cracked and dry, broken by cactus and sharp rock. They spoke only when necessary. "Water. Rest? We stop here." The silence between them was thick. It was not companionable. It was the silence of 2 animals trapped in the same snare, wary of one another. He saw her wince every time she shifted in the saddle. She was not used to riding, at least not like this. Her hands were soft, though cracked now and bleeding around the knuckles. He saw her glance at him when she thought he was not looking. He felt the weight of her stare. It was a wounded glance, sizing him up, trying to find the man beneath the grit. He gave her nothing to find. He kept his face hard, his eyes on the horizon. The second night, they made another small, smokeless fire in a dry wash. The routine was the same. He took care of the horses, checking their shoes, giving them their small ration of oats. She gathered brush, her movements stiff. He gave her the last of the beans. He drank his coffee black and chewed on jerky. He saw her watching him as he sat cross-legged by the fire, working on his saddle. It was the only thing he owned that mattered. The leather was old, dark with sweat and oil, but it was sound. He was rubbing tallow into a stiff strap, his movements practiced and sure. In this, at least, he was no fool. His hands knew leather. They knew horses. The firelight cut deep shadows across his face, highlighting the lines around his eyes. He knew she was watching. He could feel it like a physical weight. It made his shoulders tighten. He refused to look up, refused to meet her gaze. He did not want to see her pity or her fear. He was just the man getting her south. Nothing more. She was wrapped in his bedroll, near the edge of the fire's glow. He thought she had fallen asleep. He finished his work, setting the saddle gently on his tarp. Ready for morning. He lay down, pulling his hat over his eyes, inviting the exhaustion to take him. The wind had died down, and the night was terribly quiet. "I'm not a joke." The words were so soft, he thought he'd imagined them. A whisper, breathed into the cold air, not meant for him, but for the dark. Elias did not move. He did not open his eyes. He lay perfectly still, his hand resting on the grip of his Colt. But beneath his ribs, something in his chest he thought had turned to stone long ago gave a single, hard, painful thump. The land did not care if they lived or died. It offered only cactus, rattlesnakes, and wind. For 3 days, They pushed south, deeper into the high desert of the New Mexico territory. The sun was a white-hot coin in a bleached sky. The world was shades of brown and gray, broken only by the angry green of cholla and the sudden dry rattle of a snake that Elias's mare nearly stepped on. He was off his horse in an instant, his gun drawn, putting a bullet through the snake's head before Delilah even had time to scream. She just sat her horse, her hands clenched white on the reins, her face the color of ash. "Keep your eyes down," he said, his voice flat as he holstered the Colt and swung back into the saddle. "Everything out here either stings, bites, or sticks." She just nodded, her throat too dry to speak. Water became the only thing that mattered. The canteens Elias had filled at the Bar T were running low. The water tasted of tin and heat, and they rationed it to wet mouthfuls that did little to cut the dust caked in their throats. On the fourth day, the wind picked up. It came from the north, a sudden, cold blast that turned the air to grit. It howled, a physical force that shoved at the horses and ripped the torn veil completely from Delilah's hair, sending it tumbling into the scrub. Elias did not stop for it. He just pulled his hat low and leaned into the assault. Delilah huddled on the mare, her body small, her fine dress flapping in rags around her legs. That night, they found no shelter, only a shallow ditch that offered a poor break from the gale. The fire was impossible. They huddled together for warmth, their backs against the horses, eating cold jerky that tasted like leather and salt. The shared misery finally broke her silence. "My father," she said, her voice thin and carried on the wind, "is a man of God." Elias said nothing. He stared into the darkness, listening to the horses shifting nearby. "He preaches on Sundays about hellfire and temptation," she continued, her voice gaining a strange, flat strength. "On Mondays, he counts his debts. He owed money, a great deal, to Mr. Abernathy." Elias knew the type, bankers and land agents, men who owned towns without ever lifting a shovel. "Mr. Abernathy is an older man. He buried 2 wives. He told my father he was looking for a third, one who was young, obedient." The wind ripped at the words, but Elias heard them. He heard the ones she did not say, too. "My father promised him I was obedient. He sold me. That is the word for it. He sold me, and called it a holy union. The wedding was fast. Mr. Abernathy smelled of tobacco and sweet brandy." She paused, pulling the thin bedroll tighter. "That night, he locked the bedroom door. He told me he expected me to honor the bargain my father had made. He said my duty was to be a wife, and he would have it." She took a shuddery breath. I found a brass candlestick on the mantel. I did not think. I hit him, and I ran. I do not know if he is dead. I do not care. I just know that my wedding night was meant to be my prison." Elias remained still, a shadow against the darker shadows. He felt the old, familiar tightness in his gut. He knew about prisons. He wrestled with his own past, a memory that always came back smelling of cheap whiskey and perfume. Lottie. Her name was Lottie. She had hair the color of corn silk and a laugh that made a man feel 10 feet tall. He'd been working a cattle drive, had 2 months' pay in his pocket. He thought she cared for him. He'd bought her ribbons, promised her a new life. He remembered the saloon, the blur of cards, the feeling that he was, for once, a man of consequence. He remembered her laughing, her hand on his arm. Then, nothing. He'd woken up in the mud, no money, no saddle, no girl. They found her horse, the one he'd bought her, lamed 10 miles east. But no Lottie. The men at the ranch, the men in the saloon, they laughed. Said he'd been played. Said he'd probably imagined her affection. That a girl like that would never look twice at a fool like him. He'd lost a girl he thought he cared for, and she'd fallen right out of his life, taking his pride with her. His reputation was gone, replaced by a nickname that followed him like a stray dog. He looked at the woman beside him. Delilah. She had finally told him her name. She was running from a man who wanted to own her. He was running from a past that already did. He said nothing. He just pulled the heavy saddle blanket from under his gear and tossed it over her. Sleep. The wind will die by morning. It did not die. By noon the next day, the wind was still blowing, and the mare Delilah rode was starting to favor her left foreleg. Elias pulled them up, his eyes scanning the endless, flat horizon. He saw it, just a dark line against the brown earth. There, he said. It was an abandoned shack, likely a line rider's camp or a failed homestead. It was half dugout, half sod, built into the side of a low mesa. The door was gone. The roof was patchy, but it was shelter. Inside, it smelled of rat droppings and dry rot, but it was quiet. The wind howled outside, but in the small, dark room, there was only stillness. Delilah slid off the mare and her legs buckled. She sank against the mud wall, her eyes closing, every line of her body screaming exhaustion. Elias tended the horses first, rubbing them down, checking the mare's hoof. It was just a stone bruise. They needed rest. They both did. He turned back to the shack. Delilah had not moved. She had managed to pull off the ruined, ridiculous white shoes. Her feet, visible in the sliver of light from the doorway, were a mess. The delicate satin, never meant for walking, had shredded. Her stockings were soaked in blood, and her heels were raw, blistered flesh. She looked at her feet, then up at him, her face crumbling. It was the first time he'd seen her truly break. The quiet tears tracked clean lines through the dust on her cheeks. Elias stood there, awkward and out of his depth. He was good with horses. People were a mystery. He grunted, turning to his saddlebags. He pulled out his canteen and a rag he used for cleaning his rifle. He knelt in front of her. She flinched, pulling her feet back. "No, do not! You keep on like this. You will not be able to walk, let alone ride," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "Hold still." He poured precious water onto the rag. His hands, calloused and scarred from rope and wire, were clumsy. He hesitated, his fingers hovering over her ankle. It was thin, delicate. He felt like a bull trying to thread a needle. "This will sting," he warned. He touched the rag to her heel. She hissed, a sharp intake of breath, but she did not pull away. He worked in silence, his touch surprisingly gentle. He was methodical, cleaning the grit from the broken blisters, his movements economical and sure. He was touching her. Not her arm, not her back, but her feet. It was the most intimate thing he had ever done. He could feel the fine bones beneath her skin, the tremor that ran through her. He kept his eyes down, focused on the task, his throat tight. When he was done, he tore strips from a clean flour sack and wrapped them loosely around her heels and toes. "They need air," he said, standing up, breaking the strange spell. "But that will keep the dirt out." She looked up at him, her dark eyes wide and unreadable. The bruise on her lip had faded to a sickly yellow. "You have been kind, Elias." He just nodded, turning away to build a small, smokeless fire in the rusted-out stove in the corner. "Rest. We will stay here until the horses are right." They stayed 2 days, the quiet of the shack wrapped around them. Elias ventured out to hunt, coming back with 2 rabbits, which they roasted. The hot meat was the best thing either of them had tasted in days. On the second afternoon, they heard the rattle of a wagon. Elias was on his feet instantly, his rifle in his hand, pushing Delilah into the darkest corner of the shack. "Do not move! Do not make a sound!" He stood by the doorframe, a silhouette in the dim light, watching the wagon approach. It was a simple farm wagon, pulled by 2 tired mules. An older man was driving, a woman in a gray bonnet beside him. The man pulled the mules to a halt when he saw Elias. "Ho, there, friend! Did not expect to see souls in this forsaken place." He was a traveling preacher, his face weathered and kind. his eyes sharp. "Reverend Josiah Keyes," he announced. "And this is my wife, Martha." Elias stepped partly into the light but kept the rifle low. "Afternoon. We are heading to Socorro, bringing the Lord's word," the preacher said, nodding. "You folks look rode hard." The wife, Martha, was squinting into the shack. "Josiah, look! The poor thing!" She climbed down from the wagon, carrying a bundle. Delilah, seeing they were not a threat, had stepped shyly out of the shadow. Martha Keyes bustled forward, her eyes taking in the ruined dress and the girl's exhausted face. "Oh, you poor child," she clucked, her gaze softening with pity. "A hard road for a new wife, is it not?" Delilah froze. Elias saw her dilemma. Deny it, and they would ask questions. Accept it, and the lie would bind them. Elias stepped forward, lowering the rifle. "We have had a hard ride. Ma'am, my wife is not well." The word wife hung in the air, tasting strange and heavy on his tongue. Delilah looked down, and the lie was sealed. Martha Keyes pressed a loaf of dark bread into Delilah's hands. "The Lord provides. We do not have much, but you take this." The preacher smiled, a broad, benevolent expression. He reached into the wagon and pulled out a small, leather-bound Bible. "Blessings on your union, son," he said to Elias, his gaze stern but not unkind. "The world is hard, but a marriage founded in God is a fortress. Protect her." He handed the Bible to Delilah. "Psalm 91. Read it when you are afraid." They stayed only a few minutes, shared a drink from Elias's canteen, and then rumbled on, leaving a cloud of dust and an awkward, echoing silence. Elias and Delilah stood in the doorway, the bread in her hands, the Bible in his. They had not touched, they had not spoken a kind word, and now they were man and wife in the eyes of God's travelers. That night, the tension was different. The shared lie had built a thin, fragile bridge between them. They ate the bread, which was dense and sweet with molasses. It felt like a sacrament. By the light of the small fire, Delilah opened the Bible. Her hands were cracked and dirty, the nails broken, but she held the book with a reverence that surprised him. Her dress was a ruin. Her hair was matted with dust. But as she bent her head, the firelight softened her face. She looked, for a moment, like peace. He watched her, the hard lines around his own eyes softening. He was watching her trace the words with her finger. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low. "Psalm 91, she whispered. "He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty." Her voice was soft, melodic, a sound that did not belong in the harsh, scraping world he knew. He listened, mesmerized, as she read of shelters and fortresses, of being delivered from the snare of the fowler. "You read well," he said when she finished. "My father, for all his sins, taught me to read the word." She closed the book gently. She looked at him. "Thank you for what you said, to the preacher." "Easier than the truth," he muttered, turning back to the fire. "We should get moving," Elias said, breaking the spell. "We will ride before dawn. I know some quiet roads, old cattle trails. We will be in the rail camps in 2 days." As he said it, he saw her face tighten. "Elias?" "What?" "The preacher," she said, her voice dropping. "When his wife was helping me back inside, she was talking, just chattering, about the towns they had been through. She said in the last town, Santa Fe, there was a commotion. A rich banker, a Mr. Abernathy, was offering a reward, a large one, for the return of his runaway bride." The air in the shack went cold. The bread sat like a stone in Elise's stomach. Delilah's hands began to tremble, the Bible slipping from her grasp. "He is not just coming for me. He is hunting me. With money. Every man with a gun will be looking for me. Oh, God! They will find me! They will drag me back!" The panic that had been simmering for days finally boiled over. She stood up, her eyes wild, looking at the door as if the banker himself was standing there. "We have to run. We have to go now." "No," Elias said. His voice was sharp, cutting through her panic. She turned on him. "What do you mean? No, they will be here." He stood up slowly, grabbing her shoulders. His grip was hard, anchoring her. "Running in the dark is stupid. You will lame a horse or break your neck. They are not here now." "But they will be. They will find us." "No, they will not," he said, his voice low and fierce. He was surprised by the certainty in it. This was no longer an obligation. It was a choice. "They will look on the stage roads. They will look in the towns. They will not be on the trails I am taking. I know the quiet roads. I told you, we will ride before dawn. And I will get you clear." She stared at him, her panic slowly receding, replaced by a desperate, fragile hope. He held her gaze, not letting go, forcing her to believe him. Finally, she nodded, a single, jerking motion. He released her, and the distance snapped back between them. That night, Elias dreamed. He was not in the shack. He was back in the saloon, the air thick with smoke and laughter. Lottie was there, her yellow hair bright under the lanterns. She was laughing, but the sound was sharp, mocking. He was drunk, reaching for her, and she was falling. She fell from his arms, fell off the horse, fell into the darkness, and her laughter echoed as she disappeared. He woke with a jolt, his heart pounding. The fire was embers. The shack was cold and still. He heard a sound. Delilah was awake. She was sitting up, watching him. In the faint, dying glow of the fire, he saw her stand. She moved silently, just a shadow in the darkness. She walked to where he lay, his saddle at his head, his gun by his hand. He did not move. He watched her through slitted eyes, his body tense, every instinct on high alert. She did not seem to be aware he was awake. She just knelt beside his bedroll. She looked at his face for a long time, as if memorizing it. Then she leaned down, her hair brushing his cheek. She hesitated, and then she pressed a kiss to his cheek. It was a touch so light it was barely there, like a moth's wing. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of gratitude, of desperation. Elias did not move, but his hand, the one nearest her, moved on pure instinct. His fingers curled, his hand closing around her thin wrist. She gasped, startled. Her skin was cool. He could feel the small, frantic pulse beating against his thumb. She did not pull away. She leaned closer, her lips brushing his ear, her voice a trembling whisper against his skin. "I'm not a joke." His eyes flickered open. In the near darkness, he met her gaze. He saw the firelight reflected in her eyes, saw the fear, and saw something else. Something that matched the sudden, aching tightness in his own chest. He did not let go of her wrist. She did not move. They just stayed there, frozen in the stillness before morning, bound by a lie, a shared fear, and a touch. Elias did not let go of her wrist. He held it until the first thin light of dawn turned the shack's doorway from black to gray. When he finally released her, he did so without a word, rising to his feet and kicking dirt over the fire's embers. The air between them was charged, a silence heavier than the one that had come before. He did not admit, not even to himself, that anything had changed, but it had. As they rode out from the shelter of the sod house, he was no longer just a guide. He was a guard. He made Delilah ride in his shadow, keeping his horse between her and the open country to the east. He no longer scouted the horizon. He hunted it, his eyes constantly moving, searching every rise, every cluster of rock, for the glint of a rifle barrel or the telltale plume of dust. His rifle, which had before rested easy in its scabbard, now lay across his lap, his hand never far from the stock. The small acts of survival became small acts of protection. When they stopped to water the horses at a meager seep, he gave her the first drink from the canteen, watching her throat work as she drank, before taking any for himself. At night, the change was even clearer. He built the fires in deeper hollows, using only the driest wood to keep the smoke thin and low. He no longer lay down with his hat over his eyes. He sat against his saddle, his back to the rock, and watched her sleep. He watched the way the firelight softened the harsh lines of exhaustion on her face. He watched the way her hands, now calloused and cut, lay curled near her chin. He listened to the soft huff of her breath, a sound that proved she was still there, still breathing. He would sit for hours, his rifle a heavy weight in his hands. Long after her breathing had deepened into the rhythm of sleep, he was a man defined by what he had lost. He found himself, with a strange and fierce desperation, unwilling to lose anything else. Their supplies were gone. The jerky was a memory. The bread from the preacher's wife long since eaten. The rabbits he'd shot were days ago. Their bellies were hollow, a dull ache that matched the ache in their legs. "We need food," he said one afternoon, his voice rasping. "There is a town, a small one. It is on the trade route, south of here." Delilah's face tightened. Town meant people. People meant the men who were hunting her. "I will ride in," he said, anticipating her fear. "You will wait. There is a dry arroyo 2 miles north. You will take the horses there, keep them low, and you will not move. No matter what you hear, you do not move until I come back." He led her to the gully, a deep scar in the earth thick with mesquite and shadow. He looked at her, his face grim. "I mean it, Delilah. Do not move." She nodded, her eyes wide. "Be careful, Elias." He just grunted and turned his horse, riding toward the settlement. He hated this. He hated the dust of towns, the smell of cheap whiskey and unwashed men. He hated the way they looked at him, their eyes sliding over him with disinterest. Or worse, with that flicker of recognition. The saddle-broke fool. He tied Dusty to the rail outside the general store, a long, false-fronted building that smelled of dust, coffee beans, and cured leather. He kept his hat low. There were 3 men at the trough across the street, letting their horses drink. They were hard-bitten, all dust and sweat, with cheap guns tied low on their hips. Bounty men. Or maybe just drifters looking for easy pay. Elias kept his head down, moving toward the store. $50, one of the men said, his voice carrying easy on the dry air. "Just for finding a woman in a white dress? Seems like easy money." Elias froze, his hand on the door to the store. "Banker Abernathy, they said," another one spat. "Out of Santa Fe. Wants her back bad. Sent riders on every road south and west. What kind of woman runs off in her wedding dress?" The first man laughed. "The kind I would not mind finding," the third one said. A low, coarse sound. Elias's blood turned to ice. $50. It was enough to make any man with a gun start looking. It was enough to get them killed. He turned, slowly, away from the store. He could not go in. He could not buy supplies. They would see his face, remember him. When they found the tracks of 2 horses, one of them ridden by a woman, they would connect him to it. He walked his horse, slow and easy, to the livery. He acted the part of a man just passing through. He checked his cinch, adjusted his stirrup. He waited. His stomach nodded, as the sun began to dip, painting the sky in shades of orange and blood. The men finished at the trough and moved into the cantina, their laughter fading behind the swinging doors. He waited until full dark, until the moon was high and the town was asleep. Save for the tinny piano coming from the saloon, he was not a thief. He was a man who mended fences, who earned his pay. But tonight, he moved like a ghost. He slipped into the livery, his hand gentle on the muzzle of the sleeping stable horse, calming it before it could nicker. He took a sack of oats. He filled his canteens and Delilah's from the well pump. the squeak of the handle sounding like a gunshot in the silence. He moved behind the general store, to the smokehouse. The door was held by a simple wooden latch. He slipped inside, the salty hickory smell thick in the air. He took a side of bacon, a bag of coffee beans, and a sack of flour. He felt the shame heavy in his gut, but the fear for Delilah burned it away. He was not the saddle-broke fool tonight. He was a man with a purpose. He slipped back to his horse, tied the stolen goods behind his saddle, and rode out of town. Not south, but north, back into the darkness. He found her in the arroyo, exactly where he had left her. She was standing, holding the reins of both horses, a pale shadow in the moonlight.
"Elias?"
she whispered, her voice trembling. He slid off his horse, his face a hard mask. "We ride hard. They are looking for you. $50 on your head." Her gasp was a small, wounded sound. He did not give her time to panic. He gave her the reins to her mare. "We do not stop until dawn." They pushed the horses for a full day, leaving the trade route far behind, heading into the broken canyons of the high country. The sky, which had been a clear, cruel blue, began to change. By midday, it was the color of a fresh bruise, a sickly greenish purple. The air grew still, heavy, and smelled of ozone. "A storm is coming," Elias said, his voice tight. "A bad one." They were in a deep box canyon, the walls rising 500 feet on either side. The trail was the canyon floor, a dry riverbed of sand and smooth rock. "We have to climb," he yelled, already turning his horse toward a narrow deer trail that led up the scree slope. They were halfway up when the sky opened. It was not rain. It was a deluge. A wall of water hit them, turning the air white. Thunder cracked overhead, the sound bouncing off the canyon walls until it was a continuous, deafening roar. Below them, the dry arroyo was no longer dry. A muddy, churning river, 4 feet deep, appeared in minutes, carrying rocks and whole trees. "Keep going!" Elias roared over the sound. The trail was slick mud, the rocks like grease. Delilah's mare, the one from the bar T, spooked. It scrambled for footing, its iron shoes finding no purchase. "Elias!" Delilah screamed. He turned. The mare was sliding, its eyes wide with terror. It was sliding down the slope, back toward the flash flood. Delilah was clinging to the saddle horn, her face ashen. "Let go of the reins!" he yelled. He was off his own horse in an instant, lunging, half running, half sliding down the slope toward her. A section of the cliff above them gave way. The clatter of small stones turned into the terrifying rumble of boulders. The ground shook. Delilah's mare screamed as a rock struck its flank. It reared, losing its last bit of footing, and tumbled backward. Delilah fell, free of the saddle, but she was sliding, rolling toward the churning, brown water. Elias hit her. He did not catch her. He tackled her, his body crashing into hers, his arms locking around her waist. He drove his boots into the mud, stopping their momentum just yards from the flood's edge. He held her, his body shielding hers from the rocks and the driving rain. He could feel her shaking. Or maybe it was him. He could not tell. The mare was gone, swept away in the flood. He dragged her backward, scrambling up the slope, away from the roaring water. He found a shallow overhang, a cleft in the rock barely big enough for 2 people. He shoved her into it, collapsing against her, his chest heaving. He did not let go. He held her, his arms locked around her waist, her face buried in the wet leather of his jacket. He could feel her heart hammering against his ribs. He could feel the small, shuddering sobs she was trying to hold back. He held her as if she were the only solid thing in a world that was washing away. He held her for a long time, long after the worst of the storm had passed, long after the roar of the flood had quieted to a dull echo. He just held on, his eyes closed, breathing in the scent of rain and wet hair and her. The storm passed, leaving the world cold and dripping, They had lost the mare, and with it, half their stolen supplies. They were soaked to the skin, their clothes clinging like a cold shroud, and bruised from the scramble up the rocks. Elias managed to build a small, pathetic fire in the back of the overhang. He used the last of his dry matches and a handful of twigs. It gave off more smoke than heat, the firelight weak and flickering. They huddled together under his single remaining blanket, shivering. Delilah stared into the weak flames, her body trembling. "I used to think about it," she whispered. Her voice was so low. He almost missed it. Elias, half dozing, his body aching, stiffened. "Think about what?" "The river, back home, behind my father's church. There was a deep river. It was always cold, even in summer." She turned her face to him. Her eyes were dark pools in the dim light. "I thought about it, how cold it would be, how fast. I thought it would be better than being owned, better than Mr. Abernathy." She took a shaky breath. "I thought about it a lot, but I was too afraid of God, too afraid of hellfire." She looked down at her hands, then back at him. "But I have not thought about it once since that night, not since running, not since you." She looked at him, her gaze so intense it was almost a physical blow. This is hard. I am cold, and I am afraid. But it is mine. It is the first thing in my life that is mine." Elias was silent. The world he knew was simple. Horses needed shoeing, fences needed mending. Men were cruel, women were trouble. He had no words for this kind of confession, this kind of raw, naked truth. It was too deep. It hurt to look at. He did not know what to say, so he did the only thing he could. He reached out, his hand, calloused and covered in mud, finding hers. Her fingers were like ice. He wrapped his hand around hers, his grip firm. It was not a gesture of comfort. It was an anchor, a silent promise that she was not alone in the cold. She looked at their joined hands, at the way his large, rough hand dwarfed her own. Then, slowly, she leaned in. He leaned in. It was not a decision. It was like two exhausted animals huddling for warmth. It was gravity. Their lips met. It was hesitant, chapped lips against chapped lips. It was clumsy. It tasted of wood smoke and rain and the metallic tang of fear. But beneath that, there was a desperate, aching need. A need to be seen, to be held, to feel anything other than cold and afraid. It was the touch of two lonely souls, colliding in the dark. It lasted only a moment. They pulled apart, both breathing fast, as if startled by the sudden shock of it. "I am sorry," she whispered, dropping her eyes to the fire. "Don't be," he whispered back. His voice was rougher than usual. The kiss hung between them, more real than the fire, more solid than the rock shelter. The silence that followed was different. It was full. Elias cleared his throat, his hand still holding hers, unwilling to let go. He stared at the smoking twigs. "The name they call me," he said, his voice flat. "Saddlebroke Fool." Delilah waited, her gaze turning to his profile. It was a girl, 10 years back, Lottie. She had hair like, well, it was yellow. She laughed a lot. He told her the story, his voice a dull monotone, reciting facts he had buried for a decade, facts he had never spoken aloud to another soul. The saloon, the whiskey, the blind, stupid belief that she cared for him, that he was finally someone. "I bought her a horse, gave her all my pay. Woke up in the alley, my saddle was gone. She was gone." He paused, his thumb rubbing unconsciously over the back of her hand. "They found the horse she stole, my horse, 3 days later. Its leg was broke. It had fallen in a gully. She was under it. She'd been running from me, from the start." "The men," he said, his voice dropping so low she had to lean in to hear it. "They laughed. When they brought my saddle back, they laughed. Said I was a fool for believing her. Said I'd probably imagined the whole thing, that a girl like that would not give me the time of day. Said I was so stupid. I'd given my horse and saddle to a ghost. His hand tightened on hers, his knuckles white. They said a cowboy so dumb, who cannot even hold on to his own leather, should not be trusted with saddles again. He finally turned and looked at her. He was braced for it. The pity, the quiet disgust, the look that said, "Yes, you are a fool." But Delilah was not looking at him with pity. Her gaze was steady, and it was angry. It was a cold, quiet fury that startled him. "They were wrong," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it was as fierce as the storm had been. Elias just stared at her. "They were just men," she said, her voice laced with a bitterness he understood. "Laughing in a saloon. What do they know about anything? About what is in a person's heart?" She squeezed his hand. "You are not dumb, Elias. You just wanted to believe someone loved you. You just wanted what everyone wants, to not be alone." He stared at her, his throat thick. No one had ever defended him. No one had ever looked past the punchline to see the man who had been bled. A strange, stiff feeling pulled at the corner of his mouth. It was a smile, or the memory of one. It was rusty, and it cracked the dried mud on his face. But it was real. In the weak, flickering light, it changed his entire face. The hardness, the guarded lines he wore like armor, they softened. For a second, she saw the man he was before the world had named him. She saw the man who had gently cleaned her feet, the man who had dragged her from a flash flood, his own body a shield. She leaned in, not for a kiss this time, but for something more. She rested her forehead against his, closing her eyes. Her skin was cold, her hair damp, but the touch was like a brand. He did not pull away. He closed his eyes too, breathing in the scent of her. "I see you," she whispered against his skin. And in the dark, cold cave, surrounded by the ruin of their journey, Elias, for the first time in 10 years, felt seen. He did not move. He just held her hand, their foreheads touching, and let himself, just for that single moment, be. They rode for 2 days on one horse, a slow, painful crawl. Elias walked as much as he rode, sparing Dusty, whose ribs were beginning to show. Delilah rode, slumped forward, her arms wrapped around Elias's waist when he was in the saddle, or around the saddle horn when he was not. They were a single, shuffling entity of misery and exhaustion. The canyon storm had taken everything but their lives and his horse. The town appeared like a mirage, a collection of 5 or 6 sagging wooden buildings shimmering in the heat. It was not a real town, just a stop on a dusty freight line. A place called Piedra Pintada, painted rock. It looked like it had been painted with dust and left to die. "We stop here," Elias said. His voice was a dry crackle. "We need a room, and you need a dress." Delilah just nodded, too weak to argue. The rags of her wedding dress, stiff with mud and stained, were a mockery. She felt naked, her shame a palpable thing. Elias slid off Dusty's back, his knees nearly buckling. He had a few dollars left, money he'd sewn into the liner of his belt, forgotten until the hunger became a driving, desperate need. He led the horse to the inn, which was also the saloon and the general store, a long, rickety building with a sagging porch. A woman stood in the doorway, wiping her hands on an apron that had seen better decades. She was thin as a rail, her hair pulled back so tight it stretched the skin over her cheekbones. Her eyes were flat, the color of dirty dishwater, and they missed nothing. She took in the single horse, the 2 of them covered in filth, the tattered remains of a white dress on Delilah, and the dark, defensive look in Ellis's eyes. "Looking for a room," Elias said. It was not a question. "Got one," the woman said, her voice as flat as her eyes. 2 bits, in advance, 1 bed. Elias felt Delilah stiffen behind him. He looked at the woman, his face hard. "We need food, and a dress, for my wife." The word wife came out easier this time. It felt like a shield. The woman's gaze flickered to Delilah again, taking in the raw skin of her feet, now wrapped in fresh strips of flour sack. She looked at Elias's hand, which was resting near the butt of his gun. She looked at the stolen bacon and flour tied behind his saddle. She saw it all, and she did not care. Food is extra. I got some stew. I got a room in the back. Quiet. She jerked her head. As for a dress, Sarah Jenkins died last winter. Left a trunk. Might be something in there that fits. Cost you another $1. We will take it, Elias said, pulling the few coins from his belt. The woman, Mrs. Gable, took the money without counting it. Room is number 3. Up the back stairs. Stable your horse. Then come get the key. The room was small, suffocating, and hot. It smelled of mildew and old secrets. There was a single iron bedstead with a thin, lumpy mattress and a gray blanket. A cracked porcelain basin and a pitcher sat on a rickety washstand, but the door had a lock. Elias locked it. The sound of the bolt sliding home was the most beautiful sound Delilah had ever heard. For a moment, she just leaned against the door, her eyes closed. The sheer relief of being in a room, of being hidden, washing over her. Mrs. Gable brought a bucket of hot water, the stew, and a dress. The dress was plain, dark blue calico, mended at the elbow. It was the most beautiful thing Delilah had ever seen. After they had eaten the stew, a thin, watery broth with a few pieces of tough meat, the silence in the room became heavy. There was only the bed. Elias did not look at her. He took the blanket and tossed it onto the floor in the corner. You take the bed. Elias, no, she whispered. You are as tired as I am. It is big enough. He looked at the bed. It was not big enough. It was barely big enough for one person who was not looking to touch another. But the floor was hard, and his bones felt like they had been broken and reset wrong. He nodded, a single stiff jerk of his chin. They did not undress. The filth of the trail was a kind of armor. Delilah lay on one side, her back to him, her body rigid, perched on the very edge of the mattress. Elias lay on the other, his back to her, his gun belt still on, his rifle on the floor within arm's reach. They barely slept. They lay in the hot, dark room. 2 stiff lines of misery, inches apart but a mile away, acutely aware of every breath, every shift of weight on the complaining ropes of the bed. The next day, they did not leave the room. Elias paid for another night. He paid for more water. And while Delilah scrubbed the layers of grime from her skin behind a small screen Mrs. Gable had provided, Elias sat by the window, watching the street. The second night was different. The exhaustion was deeper, a bone-deep weariness that overrode the awkwardness. Delilah fell into a fitful sleep, and in the middle of the night, a chill set in. She turned, unconsciously, seeking warmth. When Elias woke just before dawn, his back was pressed against hers. He did not move. He lay there, rigid, feeling the heat of her, the rhythm of her breathing, until the sun came up. On the third day, the chill set in for good. Delilah woke shivering. By noon, she was burning. The fever came on fast, a vicious, consuming heat born from the cold floodwater, the infected blisters, and the sheer exhaustion. She was pale one moment, her skin damp and clammy, and flushed bright red the next, her eyes glassy and unfocused. Elias, a man who knew how to set a broken bone and stitch a wound, was terrified. This was an enemy he could not see, could not shoot. She is sick, he told Mrs. Gable at the door. The woman looked past him at the figure shivering on the bed. It is the lung fever, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. Or the grip. Folks die of it. What do I do? Elias demanded, his voice low and desperate. Keep her cool. Quinine. If you got it, broth. Mostly, you pray. She looked at him again, that flat, assessing stare. or you move on. Sickness is not good for a man in a hurry." "I am not in a hurry," Elias growled. He bought a small, precious packet of quinine powder from the woman and a bottle of cheap whiskey. For 3 days, he did not leave the room. He became a caretaker, his movements, usually so rough, becoming hesitant and gentle. He sat by the bed, a single wooden chair dragged from the corner, and he bathed her face with a damp rag. He forced water and broth and the bitter quinine mixed with whiskey between her cracked lips. She fought him, her hands weak but frantic. "No," she whimpered, turning her head away. "No, please, do not touch me." "Delilah," he said, his voice low, firm. "It is Elias. You're sick. You gotta drink this, you gotta—" He held her head, his large hand clumsy against her skull, and he made her drink. In the corner of the room, stuffed under the washstand, were the rags of her wedding dress. They were stiff with dried mud and smelled of the river. On the 2nd day of the fever, Elias, in a fit of desperate, angry energy, took them. He filled the basin with water and the harsh lye soap Mrs. Gable had given him. He began to wash the dress. He scrubbed at the fabric, his knuckles raw, his arms aching. He was not just washing a dress. He was trying to scrub away the fear he saw in her eyes, trying to wash away the men who were hunting her, the banker who had bruised her, the father who had sold her. He scrubbed until the water was black, and then he rinsed it and scrubbed again. He hung the tattered, clean white pieces over the back of the chair to dry, a strange, ghostly surrender flag in the dim room. That night, the fever was at its worst. Delilah thrashed, caught in the grip of the delirium. She was not in Piedra Pintada. She was back in Santa Fe. "No!" she cried out, her voice sharp with terror. "No, please, Mr. Abernathy, do not lock the door, please!" Elias sat in the chair, his hands clenched on his knees, his gut twisting. He listened as she begged an unseen monster, her body curling into a tight, defensive ball. He felt a rage so cold and pure it made his vision swim. He wanted to find this Mr. Abernathy, this banker, and he wanted to break him apart with his bare hands. "Father, why?" she wept, the sound quieter, more broken. "I was good. I was obedient. Why?" Elias felt the old shame rise in him. He was the saddle-broke fool, a joke. What was he doing here, guarding a woman who was hunted by rich, powerful men? He was out of his depth. He was nothing. Then she changed. Her thrashing stilled. She seemed to be searching for something, her hands plucking at the thin blanket. "Elias?" His head snapped up. "Elias, it is so dark," she whispered, her voice a child's. "The water, it is so cold. Do not let me go." He moved from the chair to the bed, sitting on the edge, his weight a solid, real presence. "I am here," he said, his voice rough. "I am not letting you go." He took her hand. It was hot and dry. "Elias," she breathed, her body relaxing into the mattress, her fingers clinging to his. He sat there all night. He did not sleep. He held her hand, a silent guardian in the dim, hot room, and listened to her call his name. The fever broke just before dawn on the 4th day. The consuming heat was gone, leaving her in a cold sweat, her hair plastered to her face, her body as weak as a newborn kitten, but her eyes were clear. She woke slowly, the room swimming into focus. It was gray, the color of morning before the sun. She felt empty, scoured out. She was lying on her back. She turned her head. Elias was asleep in the chair, his head slumped forward onto his chest, his face lax with a bone-deep exhaustion she had never seen. His beard was thick, his face smudged with dirt and worry. His hand was still on the bed, his fingers loosely curled just inches from her own. He looked broken. He looked like the men she had seen at the ranch, men who had been used up and worn down by the land. But he did not look like a fool. He looked like the man who had sat with her, who had held her hand while the fever tried to take her. She moved, a small, weak motion. She lifted her hand, her arm trembling with the effort. She laid her palm against the rough stubble of his cheek. He did not wake, but he grunted in his sleep, a low, weary sound. She cupped his face. This man, who had been mocked and discarded, had stayed. He had heard her shame, her fear, and he had not left. He had washed her dress. She could see it, hanging over the chair, clean and white and torn, but clean. A wave of something stronger than gratitude, deeper than relief, flooded her. It was a fierce, possessive tenderness. He was hers, and she, in this dusty, forgotten room, was his. She leaned forward, her weakness making the movement slow. She kissed him. It was not the hesitant, desperate kiss in the canyon. It was not the light, grateful kiss in the shack. This was a deep, deliberate kiss, a claim. She pressed her mouth to his, tasting the salt and weariness on his lips. His eyes snapped open. He was disoriented, his gaze blurry with sleep. He saw her face, inches from his, her eyes open, looking directly into his. He felt her mouth on his. He did not pull away. He did not move. He just woke up into the kiss. When she finally pulled back, her breath was unsteady. There was no apology in her eyes. There was only certainty. Elias stared at her, his heart hammering against his ribs in a slow, heavy beat. He saw the question in her eyes, and he knew his answer. He stood, his body aching, and reached down. He did not pull her up. He simply lifted her, his hands gentle under her arms, as if she were made of glass. He sat on the edge of the bed and pulled her onto his lap, her body light, her thin shift damp against his chest. He held her for a long moment, his face buried in her still damp hair, breathing her in. "You are not well," he whispered, his voice thick. "I am now," she whispered back. He kissed her, and this time he was a participant. It was slow, and it was deep. It was the careful exploration of two people who had nothing left to lose. He laid her back against the lumpy pillows, and the world shrank to the small, hot room, to the iron bed, to the space between them. It was tender, his hands, which knew only the roughness of rope and leather and guns, learned the softness of her skin. He was hesitant, afraid of breaking her, afraid of his own rough edges. It was desperate. This was not the joining of two people in love. It was the collision of two people who were starving, starving for warmth, for touch, for a single moment of peace in a life that was all sharp edges and running. It was slow. They had all the time in this small, locked room. He touched her with a reverence that made her ache, his fingers tracing the line of her collarbone, his lips brushing the faint, yellow shadow of the bruise on her mouth. He was unmaking the banker. He was unmaking the father. It was not perfect. It was awkward and hesitant and real. It was two broken, exhausted people, finding a sanctuary in each other's bodies. It was the first truly gentle touch Delilah had ever known. Afterward, in the quiet, she began to cry. It was not the panicked sobbing of her fever dreams. It was a slow, silent weeping, tears of release that slid from the corners of her eyes and into her hair. Elias, lying beside her, his arm heavy across her waist, went still. "Delilah, did I hurt you?" She turned in his arms, her face wet, and buried her face in his chest. "No," she choked out, her voice muffled against his skin. "No." She clung to him, her small, weak hands gripping his shirt. "It is just, this is the first time someone has touched me, and I did not feel dirty." The words hit him harder than a punch. He held her, his throat closing, his own eyes burning. He felt the full, terrible weight of her past, of what she had run from. He felt the blind, stupid rage at the men who had put this shame inside her. He smoothed her hair back from her face, his calloused thumb wiping away a tear. He held her, and he said the only words that mattered, the only truth he knew. "You are not." They slept, a true, deep, healing sleep. The next morning, the sun streamed into the room, cutting a bright, dusty bar of light across the floor. Elias woke first. Delilah was asleep, curled against his side, her face peaceful. He looked human. He had bought a razor from Mrs. Gable. He lathered his face with the harsh lye soap and, using the small, cracked mirror, he shaved. The beard came off in dark clumps, revealing the strong line of his jaw. The man he had been. When Delilah woke, he was sitting on the edge of the bed, the clean, mended calico dress in his hands. "This is better than the rags," he said, his voice quiet. She sat up, pulling the sheet with her. She looked at his face, at his shorn jaw. He looked younger. He looked like himself. She let the sheet fall, and she stood, naked and unashamed in the bar of sunlight, and let him help her into the dress. He turned her around, his hands clumsy with the small buttons on the back. When he was done, he did not move his hands. He rested them on her shoulders. Her hair was a tangled mess from the fever and the days of travel. He picked up the small comb he carried for his horses, a simple wooden thing, and he began to brush her hair. He was gentle, working through the knots, his touch firm and patient. Delilah stood with her back to him, her eyes closed, as he brushed her hair, the rhythmic pull and release a strange, domestic comfort she had never known. They looked like people again, a man and a woman, husband and wife. The peace lasted for an hour. Delilah, feeling strength return to her legs, walked to the window. She looked down at the dusty street, at the passing wagons, breathing in air that did not smell of sickness. She saw him, a man with a tin star on his vest, walking out of the saloon. He was looking up, his gaze idle. He looked right at her. His eyes widened. Delilah saw the moment of recognition, the flicker of greed. $50. She stumbled back from the window, her hand at her throat. "Elias." Elias had seen it. He had been watching the street from the side of the window, and he saw the deputy's gaze lock onto her. "Get your things," he said, his voice flat, all the softness gone, replaced by hard, cold steel. They heard the footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, 2 men. Elias did not wait. He shoved the bolt on the door. A heavy fist pounded. "Open up, in the name of the law!" "They know," Delilah whispered, panic rising. "He knows," Elias corrected. He grabbed his saddlebags, his rifle. He looked at the window. It was a 1-story drop to a filthy alley. "Go," he said. "Out the window. Get to the stable. Get Dusty. Now." "What about you?" "I will be right behind you. Go!" Another pound, this one heavier, the wood of the door groaning. Delilah threw her leg over the sill and dropped into the alley, her feet landing hard in the mud. Elias put his shoulder to the door, bracing it. "Just a minute, Marshal. My wife ain't decent." He heard the deputy laugh. "Do not care. Open the door, or I will splinter it." Elias stepped back. He looked at the door, then at the window. He was not going to be the saddle-broke fool. Not today. He waited until he heard the wood begin to split. Then he ran, diving through the window, rolling as he hit the alley, his rifle in his hand. He saw Delilah at the end of the alley, waving. He sprinted toward her. They burst into the stable. Dusty nickered. "There he is," the deputy yelled from the street. "Get on the horse," Elias ordered, throwing Delilah onto Dusty's back. "There is only one," she cried. A bullet slammed into the wood of the stable door, sending splinters flying. Elias saw it, a good-looking roan, saddled, tied to the rail inside the stable. It belonged to the deputy. He did not hesitate. He pulled his knife and sliced the reins. "Take this one," he yelled, shoving Delilah off Dusty and onto the new horse. He slapped its rump. hard. "Ride, west, do not stop! Elias, no! Go!" He swung onto Dusty's back, kicking the horse into a gallop. They burst out of the stable together, Delilah on the stolen roan, Elias on his own mount. The deputy was in the street, his gun drawn. "Halt!" Elias fired his rifle, not at the man, but at the dust at his feet. The deputy jumped back. "So, get them!" the deputy yelled to the men pouring out of the saloon. Smoke filled the air as 3 more guns opened up. Bullets whined past their ears. They leaned low. 2 riders, a man and a woman, fleeing another town, leaving their one moment of peace behind in a cloud of dust, gunfire, and smoke. They rode until the horses were ghosts, stumbling on broken rock, their breath pluming in the air. The land had risen, leaving the desert far below, trading cactus for pine and aspen. The air was thin and cold. Elias pushed them onward, his face a grim mask, following a trail that was little more than a memory from a different life. The snow began as a rumor, a few lazy flakes spinning in the gray. Heavy air. Within an hour, it was a curtain, thick and white, obscuring the world. "Where are we going?" Delilah had to shout over the wind, which had found a new, high-pitched voice in the pines. She was riding the stolen roan, a horse that was proving its strength, but even it was flagging. "A place I know," Elias yelled back, not turning. "A trapping cabin. Used it winters, years ago, before the name." He found it just as the light began to fail, tucked into a deep fold of the mountain, shielded by a stand of ancient spruce. It was small, barely 12 feet square, built of rough-hewn logs chinked with mud that had long since cracked. A low door, a single window covered with a rotted piece of canvas, and a stone chimney that leaned precariously. It was not a home, it was a hole, but it was shelter. Inside, it was dark, cold, and smelled of animal musk, dust, and the deep, dead cold of abandonment. There was a rusted stove, a crude table, and a raised wooden platform that served as a bed. "It is not much," he said, his voice flat as he dropped his saddlebags to the floor. Delilah slid off the roan, her legs numb, and stumbled inside. "It is safe," she whispered, her hands running over the rough, cold logs. "It is a locked door." That night, for the first time, they were not running, they were hiding. Elias got a fire roaring in the stove, the rusted pipe groaning and popping as the heat hit it. But it held. The cabin filled with smoke before the draft caught, but then it began to pulse with a dry, suffocating warmth. He brought the horses into a small, dilapidated lean-to attached to the back of the cabin, meant for storing pelts, but it kept them out of the wind. The snow fell for 4 straight days. The world shrank to the 4 walls of the cabin. The wind howled, a constant, high-pitched scream that wormed its way through the cracked chinking. The small room was lit by the orange glow of the stove and a single candle Elias had found in his bag. Their supplies were dangerously low. The bacon and flour he had stolen were mostly gone. He had oats for the horses, but only enough for a week if he rationed. He had his rifle, and he set snares in the woods nearby. But the storm was so thick, no animal was moving. They fell into a strange, domestic rhythm, a rhythm born of confinement and shared fear. They spoke in low voices, as if the wind might carry their words to the men hunting them. On the 5th day, the snow stopped. The world outside was a pristine, blinding white, the sky a painful, sharp blue. The silence was absolute. Delilah stood at the door, staring out at the white expanse. It was beautiful, and it was a prison. They were snowed in. "Will we ever stop?" she asked, her voice quiet. She did not turn to look at him. Elias was cleaning his rifle, the pieces laid out on the floor. He stopped, his hand pausing on the oiled cloth. He looked at her back, the straight, proud line of her spine in the mended blue dress. "I do not know, Delilah." The honesty of it was colder than the snow. She had wanted a promise. He had given her the truth. She turned. What life is this? Hiding in a hole in the ground, waiting for the food to run out, or for them to find us? They have $50 on my head. They will not stop looking. I will not let them take you. And what happens then? She cried, the fear finally breaking, turning to anger. More running, another town, another room, another gunfight in the street. I do not want to be saved. Elias, I want to live. This is living, he said, his voice hard. It is breath. It is one more day. That is all I can give you. It is not enough. It is all there is, he roared, standing up, the rifle pieces forgotten. The sudden violence in his voice made her flinch. He saw her recoil, and the anger vanished, replaced by the familiar, dull ache of his own inadequacy. It is all I have, he said, his voice dropping. I told you, I ain't the kind of man you should trust. I am a fool who gets people hurt. Stop saying that, she whispered, walking to him. You are not that man. You are the man who held my hand in the dark, the man who washed my dress. Why can you not see that? Because I see the men who are coming, he said, turning away from her. And I do not know if I can stop them. I do not know if I am good enough. He promised her one thing, his back to her, staring at the snow. But I will not leave you, whatever comes. I will not leave you behind. The tension did not break. It settled, like the snow, thick and heavy, making every movement, every word, an effort. The next day, Elias went out to check his snares. He came back with 2 rabbits. It was food, but not enough. I am going to hunt, he said, reloading his rifle. Stay here. Lock the door. Do not open it. I am coming with you, Delilah said, pulling on the heavy wool coat he had found in a trunk, a relic of the trapper who had lived here. No. I can shoot. You saw me. I can help. I am not going to sit here, a prisoner, while you risk your life for me. You are not coming, he said, his voice flat and final. You will make noise. You will slow me down. Your job is to stay hidden, to stay safe. My job? She repeated, her voice rising, edged with a dangerous fury. My job is to be the woman who stays behind, the burden. I am not a piece of luggage you have to carry. Elias, I am your partner, or I am nothing. You are my wife, he said, the word exploding out of him, shocking them both. He had not meant to say it. It was the lie they had told, but it felt true, and I will protect you. I do not need your protection, she yelled. I need you to trust me. I am not Lottie. I will not run. I will not fall. I will stand with you. Why will you not let me? Because if they find you, if they hurt you, he said, his voice breaking, raw with a fear he had never admitted. It will be because of me. It will be my fault. Again. He grabbed his rifle and slammed the cabin door behind him, the sound echoing in the vast, white silence. Delilah stood in the middle of the room, shaking. She did not cry. She was too angry. She was angry at him for his fear, and at the world for putting it there. Elias hunted for hours, but his mind was not on the tracks. It was on her. He came back empty-handed as the sun began to dip, painting the snow in shades of pink and purple. He found her sitting on the ground in the lean-to, in the freezing cold, beside the horses. She was holding his saddle. It was the old one, the one he'd had for 10 years, the one the men at the saloon had laughed at. It was cracked, the leather stiff, the stitching rotten. It is a wonder this did not break your back, she said, her voice quiet. She was not angry anymore. She was just sad. Elias sat on the ground beside her. It is what I had. It is not who you are, she said. He said nothing. The next morning, he did not go hunting. He took his knife and he walked into the woods. He came back with a long, straight piece of aspen, clear-grained and strong. He found the remains of the old trapper's workshop in the corner of the woodshed. A rusted draw knife, a battered mallet, a wooden vise. He began to carve. He spent days by the small, dirty window, the cabin filled with the sound of sharp steel shaving wood. He was carving a saddle tree, the foundation, the part no one saw, but the part that had to be perfect, or everything else would fail. He worked with a silent, consuming intensity. Delilah watched him. This was not a chore. It was not mending a fence. This was a penance. This was a prayer. He was carving away the name, the shame, the memory of the fool who had lost everything. She sat with him, mending their clothes, cleaning the rifle he was too busy to touch, making the small cabin a home. One afternoon, the light was failing. He was running his hands over the smooth, curved wood, his fingers tracing the shape of the swell and the cantle. He was frowning, his frustration clear. Delilah came and sat beside him on the floor. She did not speak. She just placed her hand over his, her fingers lacing with his. His hand was rough, covered in small cuts and wood shaving. He stopped, his hand still under hers. He leaned his head back against the wall, closing his eyes. "It is not right," he whispered. "The balance is wrong. It will rub the horse raw." "You will fix it," she said. He sighed, turning his hand over, gripping hers. "All this work, and it is just wrong. It is just wood. Elias, you can carve more. You have time." He looked at her. "We do not have time. We have rabbits and flour, and they are hunting us." "Then let us think about after," she said, her voice soft, insistent. "When we are not running." He gave a short, bitter laugh. "After? Yes, after. What is there? For you? For us?" He was silent for a long time. The only sound the crackle of the stove. "A place," he said, his voice so low she barely heard it. "A small one, with water. Maybe in the high country, Oregon, maybe, where the land is green." "A farm," she said, the word a dream. "I know horses. I can raise them. And you can have a garden, with flowers, not just rock." She smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Maybe a cow, for milk." "Maybe," he said, the word catching in his throat. He saw it, a small house, a porch, her sitting on it. The vision was so clear it hurt. "Maybe a baby," she whispered, her hand moving from his to rest on her own stomach. Elias went still. The image that flooded his mind was terrifying and beautiful. A son, a daughter, someone who had his eyes or her hair, someone who was not born in shame, but in love. "Maybe," he breathed. He turned his head and kissed her, a soft, slow kiss full of the impossible weight of their maybes. It was a kiss of peace, of hope. Just as they began to believe in the maybes, the world tore apart. It started with the smell of smoke, not the good pine smoke of their stove. This was kerosene and burning hay. "Elias," Delilah whispered, her head snapping up. He was on his feet before she finished the word. He grabbed his rifle, kicking the cabin door open. The lean-to, the woodshed, was a roaring column of fire, the flames licking at the dry logs of the cabin itself. His horses. "No!" he roared, running toward the fire. "Elias, stay back," a voice commanded, sharp and cold. He stopped. 3 men stood at the edge of the trees, rifles leveled at his chest. Behind them, 2 more men sat on horses, silhouetted against the snow. One was a large, soft man in a heavy fur coat, Mr. Abernathy. His face was pale, his eyes damp with fury. The other was her father, Reverend Martin. His face was a mask of cold judgment, his preacher's coat stark black against the white snow. "Delilah!" her father called, his voice booming with the authority of the pulpit. "Come out. You will end this shame." You will return to your husband." Elias heard a sound behind him. Delilah was standing in the doorway. She was not holding a gun. She was just standing, her face pale, her hands clenched at her sides. "He is not my husband," she said, her voice clear and carrying in the cold air. Abernathy's soft laugh was an ugly sound. "The law says otherwise. My dear, you are my property, and you broke my head, and you will come back with me." "And you," Reverend Martin said, his eyes fixing on Elias, a look of pure, divine hatred. "You, sir, are a thief and an adulterer. You will hang for this. You stole that which belonged to another man." "She is not property," Elias said, his rifle still held low, his body tense. He was calculating. 5 guns, one of him. The cabin was about to catch fire. The horses, dusty. He heard a terrible scream from inside the lean-to. His stomach hollowed out. "You see what you have done?" Abernathy said, gesturing to the fire. "All this trouble. Just come, and he might live." Elias knew it was a lie. He tried to bargain, to buy time. "Let her go. This is between you and me. Let her go, and I will." "You will do nothing but die," Abernathy sneered. Delilah stepped out of the cabin, onto the small, clear patch of snow between Elias and the men. She was brave, her head high, but she was shaking. "No," she said. "Delilah, do not be a fool," her father warned. "I am not a fool," she said, her gaze fixed on the banker. "And I am not your property. I am not a joke. And you will kill me. You will have to kill me right here, in the snow, before you ever own me again." Abernathy's face darkened with rage. He was not used to being defied. He nodded to one of the gunmen. "Put a bullet in his leg. Let us see how brave she is when her fool is screaming." Elias saw the man's rifle shift. He tried to raise his own, but he was too slow. The shot was deafening in the silence. Elias felt it, a hot, vicious punch to his left shoulder. It spun him around. He grunted a deep, shocked sound and fell to his knees, his rifle dropping into the snow. The pain was immediate, a blinding, white fire. He looked down. Blood was already soaking his coat, a bright, shocking red against the white. "Elias!" Delilah screamed. She did not run to him. She did not cry. Her father and the banker were laughing. They saw a man down, a woman defenseless. They had won. In that moment, Delilah was not a preacher's daughter. She was not a runaway bride. She was a survivor. She lunged, not for the fallen rifle. She ran past Elias back into the burning cabin, ignoring the flames that licked at the doorframe. "The girl is mad!" Abernathy yelled. She was back out in a second. In her hand was Elias's revolver, the one he had left on the table. She did not hesitate. She did not aim for the banker, or the men with the rifles. She raised the heavy gun with both hands, aimed it straight at her father, and fired. The gun kicked, nearly jumping from her hands. Reverend Martin cried out, a sound of pure shock, and clutched his chest, a dark stain spreading over his black coat. He toppled from his horse, a dead weight, into the snow. There was a moment of absolute, stunned silence. The gunman stared. The banker stared. They had come to retrieve property. They had come to intimidate a broken-down cowboy. They had not expected a woman to fight back. They had not expected her to shoot her own father. "She is a witch!" one of the gunmen yelled, his voice cracking with fear. Abernathy looked at Delilah, who stood, her dress singed, her face black with soot, the heavy revolver still smoking in her hands. She was not crying. She was glaring at him, daring him to be next. This was not the $50 they had signed up for. "Get the Reverend," Abernathy stammered, his bravado gone. One of the men scrambled to lift the groaning preacher, throwing him over his saddle. "This is not over," Abernathy spat, but his voice was thin. He turned his horse, and the gunmen followed, retreating into the trees, leaving the burning cabin, the wounded man, and the woman who had fought back. Delilah stood, unmoving, until the sound of their horses had faded. Then the gun fell from her hands. She collapsed, her legs giving out, crawling through the snow to Elias.
Elias! Oh God, Elias!
He was on his side, his face pale, his eyes closed. The snow around his shoulder was a sea of red. Just a scratch, he whispered, his eyes fluttering open.
Liar!
She wept, tearing at her dress to make a bandage. The cabin was fully engulfed now, the roar of the fire a terrible counterpoint to her sobs. The roof was falling in. Their home, their maybes, all of it was burning. "We have to go," she said, trying to pull him up. "We have to—" He was too heavy. She was not strong enough. It was then she heard it, a new sound, the rattle of a wagon, the jingle of harnesses. "They are back," she whispered, her blood running cold. She reached for the revolver. "Ho, there!" a voice called. "Dear Lord in heaven, what has happened here?" Delilah looked up. Coming up the trail was a simple farm wagon. It was Reverend Josiah Keyes and his wife, Martha. Martha Keyes took one look at the burning cabin, the man bleeding in the snow, and the weeping, soot-covered girl. She was out of the wagon in an instant. "Josiah, get the medicine trunk. Girl, hold this pad to his shoulder. Tight. Do not let up." She was a whirlwind of practical, no-nonsense energy. "Who did this?" she demanded. My husband," Delilah stammered, pointing at the tracks. "And my father." Martha's eyes sharpened. She had heard the rumors, the runaway bride, the banker. She looked at Elias, then at Delilah, and she understood. "Your father, you say," she said, her voice grim. "And you defended your husband." It was not a question. I shot him," Delilah whispered. Martha Keyes did not flinch. "I see. Well, the Lord's justice is not always clean. Child." They got Elias into the back of the wagon, on a pile of blankets. "They will come back," Delilah said, her eyes on the trail. "The law. They will hunt me for this." Martha Keyes finished bandaging Elias's shoulder. She looked at Delilah, her gaze firm. "The men who did this passed us on the trail. They were riding hard. They said a band of outlaws had attacked, that your father was shot in the crossfire." Delilah stared at her. "A terrible thing," Martha said, her face a mask of sympathy. "They did not see who did the shooting, only that they were heading north. They begged us to come see if anyone had survived the fire." She had created the alibi. She was lying to protect them. "You will not be going back the way you came," Martha said, climbing onto the wagon seat. "Josiah knows a pass. It is hard, but it will take you west, where no one will think to look. The men who did this, they will not be looking for you. They will be looking for the outlaws who do not exist." She looked down at Delilah, her expression softening. "You will escape this. You will escape the justice of wicked men. Go and do not look back." Time passed in the high, silent cabin, measured not by clocks, but by the slow, agonizing mend of Elias's body. The world was a canvas of white snow and blue-black pines. The pass Reverend Keyes had told them of had been brutal, a frozen, narrow track that had taken them west, far from any trade route, far from the world that hunted them. The cabin Josiah Keyes had directed them to was older, sturdier than the trapper's shack. It had a sound roof and a deep stone hearth, and it had been stocked with winter provisions years ago by a prospector who never returned. Sacks of beans, tins of coffee, and cured salt pork. It was a haven, a fortress of anonymity. Elias's wound was deep. The bullet had torn through the muscle and sinew of his shoulder, and in the first 2 weeks, a fever had set in. Delilah, who had once been afraid of her own shadow, became a fierce and tireless nurse. She was no longer the girl in the ruined dress. She was a woman forged in fire and fear. She kept the wound clean, using the last of the whiskey from Piedra Pintada to sear the flesh, a task that left Elias pale and shaking, his teeth clenched against a scream. She held his head, her voice low and steady, humming a tune she did not remember learning, a wordless song of comfort. While he lay weak, his arm bound to his chest in a crude sling she'd fashioned from a blanket, Delilah took on his role. She learned to use his heavy rifle, the kick of it bruising her good shoulder, but she did not flinch. She was a poor shot, but a patient one. She learned to check the snares he had taught her to make. She brought back rabbits, and once, a fool hen that had wandered too close to the cabin. She chopped wood, her small frame straining against the weight of the axe. She shoveled paths through the snow, her hands blistering, then callousing, then bleeding, then callousing again. She tended the stolen roan, which she had named, simply, Rojo. Elias watched her from the cot, his pride and his shame warring in his gut. He was useless. He was a burden. He was a man being kept alive by the woman he was supposed to be protecting. The wound in his shoulder was nothing compared to the slow erosion of his purpose. "You should eat more," he would rasp, when she divided the small portions of meat, always giving him the larger share. "I will eat when you are strong enough to skin your own rabbit," she would retort, her voice not unkind, but firm. There was no pity in her. There was only resolve. He had managed to save one thing from the fire, the aspen saddle tree. He had run back into the burning cabin, just before Delilah emerged with the revolver, and grabbed it. A foolish, sentimental act, when he should have been saving supplies. Now, it leaned against the wall, a pale, smooth sculpture of his maybe future, mocking him. Slowly, the fever passed. The wound closed, knitting into a thick, ugly scar that pulled at his skin. He began to move, his left arm stiff and weak, but his own. He took the axe from her, his movements clumsy with one good arm. He began to walk the snare lines. And then, the world began to change. It started with a sound, the sound of dripping. The heavy blanket of snow on the roof began to thin. Water trickled from the eaves. The wind, which had howled for months, softened. It began to carry a new smell, not the sharp, sterile scent of ice, but the rich, dark smell of damp earth. The snow receded, pulling back from the base of the trees, revealing patches of brown, muddy ground. They prepared for spring, not with words, but with action. Elias, his arm now in a simple sling, began to repair the rotted corral behind the cabin. Delilah, using a rusted spade head she'd found, turned over a small patch of ground near the door, a place where the sun hit first. She had no seeds, but the act of preparing the soil was a statement of intent. They were no longer hiding. They were staying. One morning, Elias took Rojo and his rifle. "We need flour," he said, "and salt, and I need to know." "Know what?" Delilah asked, her hands twisting in the apron she had made from a flour sack. "If we are still running." He was gone for 4 days. Delilah did not sleep. She sat by the window, the rifle across her lap, watching the pass. The silence of the cabin, which had been a comfort, was now a loud, aching void. She was terrified he had left, that, seeing her safe, he had decided his purpose was done, that he was too broken to stay. On the evening of the 4th day, he returned. He was not riding hard. He was just riding. He slumped in the saddle, a heavy sack of supplies tied behind him. He slid off the horse, his movements heavy. He said nothing, just walked into the cabin and dropped the sack on the table. He pulled something from his coat. It was a newspaper, weeks old, from a town called Durango, 50 miles south. He spread it on the table. Delilah looked at the pages, her heart pounding. Elias pointed, his finger tracing a small column of text. The headline was not large. "Banker's fortune lost." It spoke of a Mr. Abernathy of Santa Fe, whose land holdings and investments leveraged on a series of bad railroad speculations. had collapsed. He was ruined, his property seized by the banks in Denver. He was, the paper noted dryly, no longer a figure of influence. Delilah's breath caught. He had no money. He had no power. He could not pay $50 to a flea, let alone a bounty hunter.
Elias,
She breathed. There is more, he said, his voice flat. He turned the page. It was a small notice, filed under territorial deaths. Reverend Alistair Martin, she read, her own voice a stranger's, who passed from this life following a grievous wound. The Reverend was caught in a skirmish with unknown outlaws while traveling, and succumbed to his injuries before aid could be rendered. He was dead, her father, the man who had sold her, the man she had shot. She sat down, hard, on the small stool. She did not cry. She felt a great hollow emptiness, a sudden, shocking lightness, the heavy chain she had been dragging her entire life, the one made of duty and fear and shame, had just fallen away. She was free. Elias was free. They stood at the door of the cabin, looking out at the mountains, now streaked with green. The sun was warm on their faces. For the first time, there was no shadow in the trees. There was no one coming. The silence was profound. Freedom felt strange. It was a suit of clothes that did not fit, too large and loose. Their lives had been defined by the next ridge, the next town, the next bullet. Now, there was nothing but a wide, open, terrifying expanse of what next. Elias broke the silence. He walked over to the corral. His shoulders slumped. He leaned on the rail, his bad arm cradled against his chest. Delilah followed him. He was staring at the roan, but he was not seeing it. You are free, Delilah, he said, his voice low, his back to her. For real. This time, no banker, no bounty, no one is hunting you. We are free, she corrected, standing beside him. He shook his head, a small, bitter movement. You are free. You can go anywhere. You could go to one of those cities. Find a good man, a man who has a trade, a man who has 2 good arms. Delilah said nothing. She just watched his profile. You could have anyone, he whispered, the words torn from him. The deep, ragged wound of his past laid bare. So why stay? Why stay here, in the middle of nowhere, with a man like me? He turned to face her, and his eyes were filled with the old, familiar shame, the look of the saddle-broke fool. I got nothing, he said, his voice raw. I got 1 stolen horse, a bad shoulder, and a saddle I cannot even finish. I got Dusty killed. I got our home burned. I am what they always said I was. Delilah listened. She let him empty himself of the poison. When he was done, a terrible, heavy silence hung between them. She stepped close to him. She did not touch his face. Not yet. She took his hands, his right, calloused and strong, his left, scarred and stiff. She held them both, pressing them together. When I stumbled into your camp, she said, her voice clear and strong. What did you see? He frowned, confused. I do not know. A woman, in a torn dress. Trouble. Exactly, she said. You saw a woman. You did not see property. You did not see a daughter to be bartered. You did not see a sinner to be damned. She moved her hands, cupping his rough, unshaven face, forcing him to meet her gaze. My father looked at me and saw a debt. Mr. Abernathy looked at me and saw a thing to be owned. The men in that town looked at me and saw $50. Her thumbs brushed his cheekbones. You looked at me when I was covered in dirt, when I was bruised, when I was broken and sick, and you never once, not once, looked at me like I was less. You looked at me like I was me. You washed my feet. You washed my dress. You held my hand in the dark. You saw me. Elias, you just saw me. He closed his eyes, his throat too tight to speak. "That is why I am staying," she said softly. "Because you are the only man I have ever met who knows how to see." That night, the air was cold, but the sky was clear. A deep, sharp black littered with stars. The snow was gone, save for a few stubborn patches in the shadows. The sound of a nearby creek, freed from the ice, was a busy, cheerful murmur. Elias had built a fire outside. Beside it, resting on a new-made sawhorse, was the saddle. He had finished it. He had worked his stiff left hand until it bled, stretching the tendons, regaining his strength. He had taken the leather from the prospector's trunk, stiff but sound, and he had soaked it, cut it, and stitched it. It was not a fancy saddle. It had no silver conchos, no intricate tooling, but it was perfect. The tree he had carved was balanced. The leather was stitched tight and true. It was a saddle made by a man who knew his craft, a man who was whole. Delilah came out of the cabin, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She walked to him. He was standing by the fire, just looking at his work. She stood beside him, her shoulder brushing his good arm. She looked at the saddle, then at him. "It is beautiful, Elias," she said. "It is strong," he said, running his hand over the new, oiled pommel. "It will not break." She smiled, and in the dancing firelight, she looked like the woman she was meant to be. Not a girl, not a victim, but a partner. She leaned in and kissed him. It was not the desperate kiss of the canyon, or the claiming kiss of the sick room. It was a kiss of arrival. It was slow and deep and full of peace. It was a kiss that had nowhere to run to. She pulled back, resting her forehead against his. Just as she had done in the cave, she was smiling. "I'm not a joke," she whispered. He kissed her, a soft touch on her lips. "No," he said, "you are not." She looked up at him, her eyes catching the firelight, seeing the man who had finally, truly, come home to himself. "And neither are you." He pulled her to him, his good arm wrapping around her waist, his left hand, stiff but sure, resting on her back. He held her, and she held him. They stood in the circle of the firelight, their shadows long and flickering behind them. Two survivors who had found something more than just safety. They had found each other. In the distance, beyond the glow of their fire, in the dark, rich earth where Delilah had turned the soil, the first green shoots of an unknown spring, watered by the melted snow, were pushing their way up toward the stars. It was a new life. It was not promised. It was not easy, but it was theirs. Thank you for listening to our story. We would love to hear where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and connect with fellow listeners. Do not forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts with us in English.